town of Blackwater had always been quiet, nestled between the thick forests and the winding river that cut through its center. Most residents had long learned to ignore the eerie stretch of the riverbank where the old bridge stood. Rusted iron beams twisted like skeletal fingers over the dark waters, and planks rotted underfoot, giving off the faint scent of decay. For years, locals whispered stories about the bridge. Anyone who dared to cross it after midnight simply vanished. Some said it was cursed. Others claimed the bridge was a gateway to something beyond the natural world. Few ventured close enough to test the rumors, and those who did returned pale, shaken, or silent. 18-year-old Nathaniel lived in a small house near the northern end of the bridge. He had grown up with the stories, but like most teenagers, he was skeptical. To him, the bridge was a relic of old Blackwater, more terrifying in tales than in reality. Yet something about it called to him, an unshakable pull that drew him toward the twisted iron and fog-draped river. Nathaniel had always been curious. Every evening, he watched from his bedroom window as the fog rolled off the river, curling around the bridge. On nights when the moon was hidden, the shadows cast by the beams looked almost alive, writhing in patterns that made his stomach twist. He had asked his parents about it before, but they would only warn him to stay away. "The bridge is not a place for children," his father had said sternly. "Stay on your side of the river. No good comes from crossing it at night." Yet Nathaniel could not ignore the fascination. Something about the silent, abandoned structure called to him, as if the whispers of the missing had seeped into his own thoughts. He tried to shake it off, focusing on mundane life, school, chores, friends, but the bridge lingered at the edge of his mind. That evening, Nathaniel stood at the edge of the riverbank, the fog thickening around his feet. The moon was a thin crescent in the sky, barely illuminating the bridge. Every creak of the old plank seemed amplified, echoing across the still waters below. He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder at the empty town streets, feeling a shiver run down his spine. Stories of the missing flickered in his mind. A fisherman who had vanished while returning home late, a teenager last seen near the bridge at midnight, an elderly man who disappeared without a trace, his boat found empty downstream. The air seemed to vibrate with the unspoken presence of those who had walked the bridge and never returned. Nathaniel took a deep breath and stepped forward. The first plank groaned beneath his weight, the sound sharp in the silence. Fog curled around his ankles as he moved carefully, eyes fixed on the far side. Each step was deliberate, each breath steady, as he forced himself to focus on the physical world, to ignore the growing sensation that he was being watched. Halfway across, the wind picked up, carrying a low, whispering hum. Nathaniel froze. It was almost as if voices were drifting through the fog, murmuring his name. He scanned the shadows, seeing nothing, yet feeling the weight of unseen eyes. Panic prickled along his spine, but he forced himself forward. A sudden flash of movement caught his attention, a shadow darting along the bridge's edge. Nathaniel's heart pounded as he turned, but the shadow vanished before he could focus. The bridge groaned ominously, as if protesting his presence. Nathaniel remembered the stories. Those who crossed the bridge after midnight vanished, but he was determined to understand. Was it a curse, a natural hazard, or something beyond reason? As he neared the far side, the fog thickened, curling around his legs like living tendrils. The whispers became clearer, forming words that were almost comprehensible. "Leave. Now. Too late." Nathaniel's stomach twisted. His rational mind screamed to retreat, but curiosity rooted him in place. He pressed forward, feeling the bridge shift beneath him, the air growing colder with each step. He realized then that this was no ordinary structure. The bridge seemed alive, aware of his presence, testing him, assessing his fear. Nathaniel's steps slowed as he reached the midpoint of the bridge. From below, the river gurgled and lapped at the rotting supports, its black waters reflecting nothing but shadow. He peered over the edge, trying to see the riverbed, but the fog clung thick and heavy. He remembered the stories his grandmother had whispered, tales passed down for generations. A young couple who had crossed the bridge decades ago, returning only as empty shells, wandering aimlessly through the town before disappearing entirely. A fisherman whose boat was found abandoned, his face pale and eyes wide in a silent scream. Children who dared each other to step onto the planks after midnight, some never returning, their laughter swallowed by the fog. These were no longer mere tales. They were warnings, etched into the town's collective memory. Nathaniel felt the weight of these histories pressing down on him, a reminder that the bridge was more than wood and iron. It was a sentinel, a threshold, a trap. Suddenly, a low wind whipped across the bridge, carrying a whisper that seemed to come from beneath the planks. Nathaniel froze, every nerve on edge. The sound of movement shifted beneath him, subtle at first, then growing. A scraping, like nails along wood, echoing from the shadows below. A cold sensation crept up his spine. He turned his head slowly, and in the dense fog, he thought he saw a figure just beyond the edge of the bridge. A shadowed form standing perfectly still. It didn't move like a human, yet its posture was deliberate, almost watchful. Nathaniel blinked, but when he looked again, it was gone. Heart racing, he realized that the bridge had changed. The familiar planks now seemed to stretch endlessly, the fog curling tighter, almost tactile, wrapping around his ankles. The whispers intensified, murmuring, "Too late, too late, too late." Nathaniel's rational mind struggled against the fear. He repeated to himself, "It's just stories, just fog and wind, just shadows." Yet every fiber of his being felt the presence of something else, an awareness, a sentience embedded in the bridge. He tried to focus on each step, counting planks, noting their rot and cracks. But the bridge resisted. Planks that had felt solid now creaked ominously. Iron beams groaned under imaginary weight. Each sound amplified the tension in his chest. The fog began to swirl, forming shapes that were almost human faces of those who had vanished over the years, their eyes hollow, mouths moving silently, reaching for him with impossible angles. Nathaniel stumbled, grabbing a rusted railing for support, his fingers slipping over cold, wet metal. A sudden gust pushed him forward, forcing him to step into a particularly narrow section. The bridge beneath him shifted slightly, a subtle vibration, and the whispers rose into a chorus. "Join us, cross, vanish." Nathaniel's pulse raced. He had reached the far edge, or so he thought, but the bridge seemed to stretch on, endless and warped. The shadows converged, fog curling like fingers around his legs. His breath came in shallow gasps, but his curiosity, stubborn and fierce, anchored him. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. Tonight, he would reach the end. Tonight, he would either uncover the truth behind the bridge, or become another whisper in the fog. From the mist, he felt eyes on him, watching, judging. The river below was silent, black, and infinite. One step forward, and he crossed the boundary into the unknown. The morning after the first disappearance, Blackwater awoke to a hollow quiet. The town's streets, usually peppered with the sounds of daily life, were muted. Windows remained shuttered, and neighbors spoke in hushed tones, exchanging glances filled with unease. Nathaniel walked through the narrow streets, his notebook clutched tightly. He had spent the previous night staring at the bridge from his window, waiting for signs, trying to see if the fog would betray any movement. His curiosity had shifted into something heavier now, an understanding that the bridge was no mere relic. Mrs. Caldwell, an elderly woman who lived near the riverbank, had vanished after crossing the bridge at midnight. Her house sat empty, doors ajar, the faint smell of decay lingering in the air. Whispered rumors spread through Blackwater like wildfire. The bridge, she crossed after midnight. She never returned. Children whispered the stories to one another, warning of the shadowy figure that roamed the bridge, of voices calling names from the fog, of unseen hands that dragged the unwary into darkness. Nathaniel noted each tale carefully, jotting down every rumor, every fragment of observation. That evening, another disappearance occurred. Tom, a local fisherman, was last seen walking home across the bridge after checking his nets. When he failed to return, neighbors searched along the riverbank, calling his name, but found only empty planks and the dense curling fog. Nathaniel felt the gravity of the situation deepen. This was no longer a story to satisfy curiosity. It was real. The bridge was claiming lives one by one, and the town's fear was palpable. By the third night, panic had begun to take hold. Shops closed early. Families kept their children inside, and those who had seen the bridge in the moonlight spoke of strange sounds, faint scraping, whispers, and footsteps that echoed too precisely to be their own. Nathaniel observed the pattern. Each disappearance occurred after midnight, with the victims drawn to the bridge by unknown forces. The fog thickened during these hours. Shadows along the iron beams seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. He began documenting every detail: the time of disappearance, the conditions of the river and fog, the behavior of the victims before they left. He noticed a chilling commonality. All who vanished reported feeling a pull, a compulsion they could not resist. One night, he followed carefully from a distance, watching as a man approached the bridge. The planks groaned beneath his steps, fog curling around his ankles, and faint whispers rose from beneath. Nathaniel's pulse quickened as he saw the shadowy figure appear beside the man. Not fully human, not entirely solid. The man froze, then was swept into the fog, vanishing without a trace. The town's collective fear escalated. Meetings were held in hushed voices at the community hall. Some suggested burning the bridge. Others claimed it was sacred or cursed. Blackwater became a town of watchers, neighbors observing each other, afraid that speaking the bridge's name aloud might draw the shadow closer. Nathaniel tried to communicate his observations, but most dismissed him as a curious youth, overly fascinated by tales better left alone. Yet even the skeptics felt the unease, the invisible pull that seemed to emanate from the bridge each night. He confided in Sophie, a friend who had grown up nearby. "It's the bridge," Nathaniel said. "It's alive somehow. It knows who's near. It's choosing them." Sophie's eyes widened. "Choosing, like it decides who disappears." Nathaniel nodded. "I've seen it. There's a pattern. I want to understand it before it's too late." By the end of the week, 4 more villagers had vanished. Each disappearance followed the same chilling progression. The victim would be drawn to the bridge at or after midnight. Fog would rise unusually thick around the planks. Shadows would appear along the edges, almost human, almost alive. The victim would disappear, leaving only a faint echo of footsteps in the fog. Nathaniel felt a growing responsibility. He could no longer stand by. Each night he recorded, observed, and waited, determined to uncover the mechanism behind the bridge's deadly pull. The townspeople whispered of curses, of spirits, of old sins bound to the iron and wood. But Nathaniel's curiosity was stronger than fear. He realized that to prevent more deaths, he had to confront the bridge, understand its nature, and perhaps even step onto the planks himself. On the 7th night, Nathaniel made a decision. He would follow the pattern, trace the victim's steps, and document what occurred on the bridge after midnight. He prepared carefully: flashlight, notebook, camera, and a small amulet Sophie had given him for protection. A talisman of old local lore, meant to ward off malevolent spirits. As the clock struck 12, Nathaniel stepped quietly from his house. The fog clung to the riverbank, curling in thick tendrils around his feet. The bridge loomed ahead, rusted beams twisted like skeletal hands reaching into the black water below. A faint whisper rose on the wind, almost audible. "Come, join us, vanish." Nathaniel swallowed hard, gripping the flashlight tightly. One step forward, and he would cross into the unknown. His pulse raced, every instinct screaming to turn back, but to Tonight, he would confront the truth. And with that, he stepped onto the bridge, into the waiting fog, into the darkness that had claimed so many before him. Nathaniel spent the day buried in the dusty archives of Blackwater's town hall. Old newspapers, yellowed ledgers, and brittle letters detailed the town's history and the bridge's grim legacy. He discovered that the bridge had been constructed in the late 1802, spanning the river after a series of floods destroyed earlier wooden crossings. Almost immediately after its completion, records hinted at mysterious disappearances. One entry from 1893 noted a traveling merchant lost to the bridge. The body never recovered, while a 1927 newspaper reported a young couple who vanished, leaving their belongings on the riverbank. These were not isolated incidents. Patterns repeated roughly every decade, though the frequency had increased in recent years. Nathaniel copied everything into his notebook, noting times, dates, and the ages of the victims. A chilling pattern emerged. Most disappeared after midnight. Most had some connection to curiosity or defiance, and many had been alone. After the archives, Nathaniel visited the town's oldest residents, seeking oral histories. Mrs. Caldwell's sister, now living in a small apartment near the town center, told him about the bridge spirit. "They say it's not a person or a ghost," she said, voice trembling. "It's alive in its own way. It knows when someone approaches, feels their fear, and chooses whom to take. Some who've crossed claim they heard whispers of their own name. Some say the bridge called to them." Nathaniel shivered. The description matched what he had already witnessed: the pull, the whispers, the fog curling unnaturally. It was as if the bridge itself were sentient, feeding off the tension, curiosity, and fear of those who dared approach. He visited a local historian next, uncovering a faded journal detailing rituals attempted to appease or ward off the bridge. Townspeople had thrown offerings into the river, burned candles, and performed prayers, but all proved ineffective. The bridge remained a relentless force, claiming its victims and reinforcing the town's fear. Back in his room, Nathaniel spread maps, notes, and photographs across the floor. He tried to quantify the disappearances, searching for patterns. One insight struck him like lightning. The victims' disappearances coincided not just with time, but with their internal emotional state. Those who were anxious, fearful, or curious were most often drawn to the bridge. Those who ignored it or treated it lightly generally remained safe. Nathaniel realized the bridge was more than a physical structure. It was an entity responsive, selective, and intelligent. Each disappearance was calculated, each encounter tailored to the person's psychological vulnerabilities. He thought about his own fascination, the pull he had felt toward the bridge. A cold dread settled in his chest. If the bridge sensed his curiosity, it might already be choosing him. That evening, Nathaniel returned to the riverbank to observe the bridge from a distance. The fog clung low, curling like living tendrils around the river's edge. He noted small, almost imperceptible movements in the shadows, patterns that seemed deliberate, as if the bridge itself were breathing. He saw figures moving in the mist. Not real people, he realized, but echoes, reflections of previous victims. Some mimicked life, walking the planks silently, while others stood still, staring into the fog with hollow eyes. Nathaniel's heart raced. The whispers rose from the bridge, faint and insistent. Come closer, join us." He felt the tug, the irresistible pull, stronger than ever before. It wasn't just fear. It was something else, something old and alive, calling to the human mind. Nathaniel retreated to his home, shaken but determined. He knew what he had to do. He would confront the bridge directly. He gathered materials for protection, a flashlight, rope, journal, and a small amulet for warding. He reviewed every detail he had discovered, the history, the patterns, the whispers, and began to form a plan. If he could understand how the bridge selected its victims, Perhaps he could anticipate its behavior, or even resist its pull. The stakes were high. He could not fail, or more lives would be lost. As night fell, Nathaniel looked out his window at the fog-wrapped bridge. The iron beams loomed like skeletal fingers, the river below black and silent. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. Tomorrow, he would step onto the planks not as a victim, but as an observer, a challenger, perhaps even a savior. The bridge waited. The night was unnaturally still. Blackwater's streets lay quiet, windows darkened, and the fog hung thick like a blanket over the town. Nathaniel stepped out of his home, heart hammering, amulet in hand, flashlight clipped to his belt. Every instinct screamed to turn back, yet curiosity and determination propelled him forward. The bridge loomed ahead, skeletal and silent. Rusted beams twisted against the night sky like clawed hands reaching into the black water below. Nathaniel's breath condensed in the cold air as he stepped onto the first plank. It groaned under his weight, a deep, resonant sound echoing across the river. Immediately, he felt it. The pull, the subtle tug of the bridge itself. The fog seemed to curl around his ankles, moving with intent. Shadows twisted along the planks, elongated, reshaping, forming shapes that were almost human, yet grotesque. With each step forward, whispers rose from the fog. "Come, join us. Stay." The words seemed to echo inside his mind, simultaneous and overlapping, impossible to ignore. Nathaniel clamped his hands over his ears, but the voices persisted, indistinct yet commanding. A shadow moved beside him, mimicking his stride. It had no features, yet he felt its gaze, cold and intelligent, measuring his resolve. Nathaniel's pulse quickened. The bridge was not merely haunted, it was alive, sentient, and testing him. He forced his focus back to the planks, counting each one, grounding himself in the physical world. He recalled the journal's notes. The bridge chose based on fear, curiosity, and hesitation. By remaining steady, perhaps he could pass without succumbing. Halfway across, the fog thickened, and shadow figures began to emerge. They reached out with elongated limbs, twisting unnaturally, as though they were made of smoke and mist. Each step Nathaniel took seemed to ripple the fog, drawing them closer. One figure froze in front of him, motionless. It resembled a man he had seen in the archives, a missing fisherman from years ago. Its hollow eyes met his, and a silent scream seemed to press against Nathaniel's mind. He shuddered but did not retreat, gripping the railing tightly. Suddenly a cold wind pushed him, and he stumbled, but he recovered. The bridge groaned violently, and the whispers rose into a cacophony of commands. Stay, belong, disappear. Nathaniel felt the pull stronger than ever, tugging at his mind as well as his body. Nathaniel paused, breathing heavily. He realized the bridge's power was psychological as well as supernatural. The fog, the whispers, the shadows, they were manifestations of fear, past victims, and collective memory. By remaining calm, by acknowledging the pull without succumbing, he could manipulate the bridge's influence. He focused on a single point ahead, visualizing the far side clearly. Step by step, he advanced, ignoring the shadows that lunged and recoiling, the voices that screamed his name, the tendrils of fog that tried to wrap around him. Each deliberate step weakened the shadow's hold, the fog thinning slightly with his confidence. A low growl, deep and resonant, emanated from beneath the planks. Nathaniel understood then. The bridge did not want him to reach the other side. It wanted him to surrender, to give in to fear. As Nathaniel approached the far side, the fog began to lift, revealing the riverbank faintly illuminated by moonlight. The shadows grew desperate, lunging, twisting, and screaming silently in frustration. He clutched the amulet, whispering a protective charm he had learned from the historian's notes. One final step, and he crossed the threshold. The shadows recoiled, the fog dissipated slightly, and the bridge groaned as if releasing its tension. Nathaniel stumbled onto solid ground, breathing hard, heart racing but alive. He turned to look back. The bridge stood silent once more, deceptively inert. Yet he could feel it dormant, patient, waiting. The knowledge he gained tonight was powerful. The bridge could be resisted, understood, and perhaps survived. But it had not been defeated. Nathaniel knew that what awaited next, the final confrontation, the ultimate truth behind the bridge, was inevitable. The river fog thickened more than ever as midnight approached. Nathaniel stood at the riverbank, staring at the skeletal bridge. Each rusted beam cast a long, jagged shadow in the moonlight. The events of the past nights weighed heavily on him. The vanished villagers, the whispers, the shadows that had tried to pull him into the fog. Tonight, he would confront the source, not as an observer, not as a passive witness, but as a challenger. Every step he took toward the bridge felt heavier, the pull stronger, as if the bridge knew what he intended. Nathaniel stepped onto the first plank. Immediately, the whispers began, louder, more urgent. Join us, belong, stay. Shadows moved along the railings, stretching like smoke, shapes flickering between human and something else. He gripped the amulet, grounding himself, repeating a protective charm. Step by step, he advanced, forcing himself to ignore the tendrils of fog that reached for him, the voices that echoed in his mind. Halfway across, he saw figures from past disappearances, ghostly echoes frozen in terror. Their eyes locked on him, mouths moving silently, pleading, warning, cursing. Nathaniel understood. The bridge fed on fear and curiosity, but also on regret. Each shadow represented unresolved dread, lingering in the bridge's memory. At the midpoint, the bridge seemed to warp around him. Planks stretched, beams twisted, and the fog thickened into a near-solid wall. From the mist, a shape emerged, a massive, shifting shadow, darker than the night, its edges fractal, pulsing with intent. "You dare challenge me?" A voice rasped, simultaneously inside his head and in the fog. "All who cross are mine." Nathaniel's heart pounded, but he stood firm. He had prepared for this moment. Focusing on the faces of the villagers, the patterns he had studied, he extended his awareness into the fog, projecting determination, hope, and the will to resist. The shadow lashed at him, tendrils of darkness slicing through the air. Nathaniel dodged, stepped carefully, and pressed forward. He realized that fear was the bridge's weapon, courage his shield. With every step, Nathaniel pushed further, visualizing the far side of the river as a place of safety, stability, and light. The shadows recoiled, the fog parted slightly, and the whispers became fragmented. He reached the center of the bridge, facing the heart of the entity. Concentrating, he called upon every fragment of courage he possessed, envisioning the missing villagers freed from the bridge's grip. The shadow shrieked, a sound that tore through the night, but Nathaniel did not falter. A brilliant flash of energy radiated outward, dissolving the fog, scattering shadows, and momentarily silencing the whispers. Nathaniel stumbled, catching himself on a plank, and saw the bridge itself trembling, as though struggling to maintain its hold on the world. Finally, Nathaniel stepped onto the last plank. The bridge groaned once, a deep, resonant sound, then settled into eerie silence. The fog had lifted enough to reveal the river below, calm and reflective. He looked back at the shadows, seeing them fade into the mist. The echoes of past victims remained faintly, but no longer threatening. Nathaniel knew the bridge had not been destroyed. It had been resisted, understood, and temporarily subdued. Walking to solid ground, he felt the weight lift slightly from his chest. The town of Blackwater would live to see another day, though the memory of the bridge's power would linger forever. The bridge remained, skeletal and silent, waiting patiently for the next curious soul, the next midnight crossing. Nathaniel understood one final truth. Some mysteries cannot be fully solved. They can only be confronted, survived, and remembered. The bridge had judged him and he had endured.